Item 6 is the Places for Everyone publication draft 2021 plan, which was approved by the Executive on Monday, and Council is now asked to agree that the plan be submitted to the Secretary of State for examination following the period for representations. The Executive Member for Housing and Regeneration, Councillor Wright, is to introduce the report and move the recommendations. Councillor Wright, please.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies to anyone who was at Executive on Monday night if I'm repeating myself. I'm delighted to bring this report to Council, which is a strategic plan to deal with the housing crisis across Greater Manchester and provide guaranteed land for employment, helping the local economy to grow following the COVID-19 pandemic. As I'm sure members are aware, the background to this plan is that in Trafford we simply do not have the brownfield land supply available to build the homes that we need. Both the housing land availability assessment and the call for sites have confirmed that. We have and will continue to take a brownfield first approach, but this is simply not enough. We have a housing crisis in Trafford and across Greater Manchester. The average home costs over 8 times the average salary. There are thousands of people waiting for social housing, and we cannot and will not turn a blind eye to this. This plan will see some land released from the Greenbelt in order to meet our housing targets and deal with the housing crisis. However, this plan, in comparison to previous iterations, sees a significant reduction in Greenbelt loss. In the original GMSF plan from 2016, not just did we have significantly more loss at Carrington and Timperley Wedge, but we also had loss at Flixton. As members will be aware, Flixton has been removed as part of the negotiations with Greater Manchester, and there have been significant reductions across both Carrington and Timperley. 72 hectares saved in Carrington and 14 hectares saved in Timperley in the current Places for Everyone plan. This equates to a reduction of circa 40% in Greenbelt loss over the last 5 years. As members will be aware, without a collaborative approach with the other 8 GM authorities, now excluding Stockport of course, we will be required to find land for a further 5,000 homes. This would inevitably lead to even further Greenbelt loss, as we simply do not have the land within the urban area that can meet this need. Whilst most of the headlines surrounding GMSF and now Places for Everyone have been dominated by housing and setting a new Greenbelt boundary, there are other very positive parts of the plan which are worth noting. Firstly, as the ward council who represents Carrington and the nearby communities of Partington and Sale West, this plan provides the framework to further support and enhance the regeneration of Partington and Carrington itself. Partington is the most isolated part of Trafford and one of the most deprived. One of the key issues faced in Partington is a lack of access to good jobs across Trafford and the wider GM conurbation. The transport links are simply not good enough. The public transport provision is not fit for purpose. As per the report, this plan works alongside the GM Transport Plan 2040, which proposes to enhance sustainable modes of travel and improve upon the existing transport network, whilst making travel more sustainable through public transport and walking and cycling routes. The road network that connects Partington to the rest of Greater Manchester is simply not good enough. Manchester Road is simply not up to the task. To enable the regeneration of Partington, to alleviate the issues faced by villagers in Carrington, a new road is required. The options for that new road will become clearer later this year. However, let's be clear, we cannot have sustainable and better public transport without a road which is fit for purpose. We cannot alleviate the issues faced by people who live on Manchester Road without taking heavy traffic off this road. Secondly, and this list is not exhaustive, Places for Everyone supports the GM vision to be carbon neutral by 2028 and enhances the protection of green open spaces like in Sale West. There are also more detailed policies on mitigating the impacts of climate change. Members who vote against this plan tonight are voting against a plan which has halved the Greenbelt taking Timperley Wedge compared to the Tories plan in 2016, are voting against saving the proposed release of Greenbelt in Flixton, again a proposal made by the Tories, and are voting against significant reductions in the Greenbelt release in Carrington. Let me make it very clear. This is the only genuine plan on the table that meets our housing need, our housing targets, and begins to tackle the high housing crisis. Without this plan, we open Trafford up to unplanned Greenbelt development, which won't be in the hands of people locally, but will be decided upon by the planning inspector. Given the importance of this vote, I formally request a recorded vote on this item when we come to it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Is that seconded, please?
It is seconded, Mayor, thank you. And I am happy to second the Places for Everyone proposal this evening. There is a national and a local housing crisis, and in the very near future there won't be enough places for everyone to live. Even without a government policy passed on to local authorities, we can't ignore that, and we have to act now. And the Places for Everyone proposal is the responsible way to plan for our future, to build the new homes that are needed and to provide vital employment opportunities and infrastructure. I'm hoping that cross-party members will be supportive of the plans, but note that there was some opposition expressed in the executive meeting on Monday. I'd like to reflect that it isn't very long ago that the GMSF was comprehensively advocated by the previous administration. Conservative councillors, when in administration, spoke passionately about the need for the spatial framework and about being responsible in ensuring sufficient housing for the next generation. And the plans for Trafford, drawn up by the previous administration, as Councillor Wright has said, included the building of 750 homes on Flixton Fields. The Labour administration immediately removed the fields from those proposals because this wasn't the responsible way to do it, and have since protected the land for use by the community. We've also worked sensitively, appropriately and collaboratively to achieve a reduction in building on Greenbelt land by almost half, that which was put forward by the former Conservative administration. And we may hear some discussion tonight from Liberal Democrat colleagues that brownfield land should be developed first. And yes, whilst the Places for Everyone plan has adopted an approach to use as much brownfield land as possible, it is the case that brownfield-only land will not be sufficient to achieve the numbers of homes required. It would not be feasible nor a sound approach to wait for brownfield land to become available. And as such, in order to ensure the next generation has somewhere to live and opportunities to work, we need to release some land from the Greenbelt. I haven't to date heard an opposition argument that proposes a responsible way to tackle the housing shortage and urge all members to get behind this plan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hines. As indicated earlier, we have a number of people listed who are going to speak to this item. So we're going to go to those speakers first. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The long-running conversation around Places for Everyone, formerly known as the GMSF, is a rehash of an outdated scheme. The Mayor, Andy Burnham's name change is a soft sell of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework into a Places for Everyone, and is clearly a recognition that the old name and old plan didn't cut the mustard. This new name attempts to hoodwink residents into believing it's a different plan, and that it's not all about taking the easy option of building all over our Greenbelt. Only on Monday at the executive meeting, we had Councillor Freeman informing us that businesses will be failing due to COVID and the world had changed. Those changes are amongst many that make the repeated decision to continue with an outdated plan and not focus on the existing and new brownfield sites that Councillor Freeman recognises is just unacceptable. All this while Trafford Council have called a climate emergency last year in our usual council chamber, and yet in the next breath plan to concrete our Greenbelt. Dare I say, the new plan is a wolf in sheep's clothing, detrimental to the residents of Trafford and must be voted against, as we saw happen in Stockport. There are alternative approaches. Stockport, for example, has chosen a new route. Trafford has been lazy and relied upon Andy Burnham, who barely visits our borough, to put together our plan for us. I ask you, where are the school places for the developments we have going on already? We have none, let alone the additional places that this new plan will demand. Children cannot be crammed into schools as this Labour administration is insisting upon. We have already had planning applications suggesting that children from Trafford attend schools in Warrington and Salford. All GM authorities must adopt a fresh plan that ensures Greenbelt land continues to be protected and is not released whilst any brownfield sites are available, and stop laying the blame at the government for their own dereliction of duty. Brownfield sites are available for development, and we will no doubt see more. That is why we must get on with our own local plan immediately. Just because it's easy to build on the green spaces and cheaper is no justification for building on our Greenbelt. And the Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick, not last week, states you can only build on the Greenbelt with clear justification, and there clearly isn't. Warm words from Labour and others on housing need must be balanced with residents that already live in Trafford. They deserve to live in an area where the council maximises the brownfield sites and has a plan with green spaces protected for their families. We need a local plan from local people that is smart and fluid and builds homes on brownfield sites whilst ensuring we have the infrastructure to support it. Things have changed. To be clear, we have a Labour Mayor, we have a Labour Council, and here we have a Labour plan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Newgrosh. Can I say to everybody, can we listen to the speakers, please? I really don't like people interrupting. People are quite welcome to speak, and I don't feel it's right that there's background noises occurring when they are speaking. Councillor Newgrosh.
Councillors, Mr. Mayor, not all decisions we take here are equal. This is arguably the furthest reaching and most controversial we may ever vote on. You are all aware of my personal and the Liberal Democrats group long-standing opposition to this deeply flawed and unsound plan. Let me explain why. The whole of GMSF2, or Places for Everyone, is based on flawed growth predictions made way back in 2014, a time before Brexit and its predicted 5% shrinkage to the economy by 2030, a time that could not conceive of a pandemic claiming tens of thousands of lives. It is abundantly clear the data underpinning the whole plan is wrong and growing more so as the years pass. And why the hurry? The 2021 census data is available in a few months. Solid data that could underpin a better plan, our local plan. Another critical failing is the complete lack of requirement to use any of our brownfield availability. Despite Councillor Wright's protestations, this is clearly a Greenbelt first plan. In fact, he has admitted on Monday that it's Greenbelt from day one. No requirement for developers to touch the land banks they sit on. No incentive at all. This plan gives free rein, carte blanche, to build on Greenbelt the second it's passed. How perverse that we find Labour executive putting developers' profit margins before their own residents. I must at this point address housing need, as it is fundamental. Yes, councillors, we need housing. Affordable, social, low-carbon housing. This plan identifies enough brownfield to provide over 16,400 dwellings, roughly 14 years' supply, brownfield such as Bowker Court in my ward. What this plan completely lacks is a requirement to use it. This plan also fails any test of fairness. The three most densely populated wards of Trafford are Clifford, Timpley and Timpley Village. The highest density housing in Timpley are the residents of Broomwood. These plans build literally across the road from them, robbing them of the only significant open space for miles around. You are destroying the Greenbelt next to the residents that can least afford its loss. One of the many insanities of this plan is that it allocates Greenbelt for new office space. Even before COVID, we were converting offices into apartments. But since the pandemic forced a fundamental shift in working practices, it makes this allocation even more absurd. This plan makes no acknowledgement of or consideration to the changes that COVID has brought. Finally, as time is regrettably short, I must address the ecological damage you will unleash should you vote for this. Timpley Wedge is the main rainfall catchment areas for the rivers Ferrywell and Timpley Brook. Both of these have flooded twice in the 2 years I have been a councillor. One in 100-year events, I'm told, flooding many of my residents' homes. This plan will ensure more frequent and devastating floods. Perhaps the greatest crime I've left to last. Carrington Moss is a peat moss of up to 3 metres in depth. Destruction of this critical carbon sink will release megatons of carbon, making a total mockery of both Trafford's carbon budgets and our climate emergency, both of which you voted through recently. Voting for this plan would be hypocrisy of the highest order. There is no ducking responsibility for this, should you vote for it. Just following orders won't wash any more than it has in the past. Consider your conscience, councillors. Demand better. Reject this unsound plan. Vote against. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newgrosh. Councillor Coggins, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to start by thanking all the officers and indeed councillors who've worked on this. It's been a massive and extremely difficult job over a very long time. And I think we need to acknowledge that difficulty and acknowledge the improvements that the current administration have made compared to previous drafts of this. It was always going to be fiendishly difficult, and I think there are no easy answers here. We have a housing crisis, and so we need more homes, but we have a climate and ecological emergency, and so we need to protect our green spaces. Now, we in the Green Party agree that working together across 9 or 10 boroughs was the right approach. However, we believe that the principles used to tackle it have been flawed. The underlying principle of this project should have been about building the homes and infrastructure we need whilst protecting our climate and nature. We know that we cannot have endless growth on a finite planet, and this plan sadly gives too much priority to economic growth at the expense of our own well-being. We need some climate realism here. Now, Timpley Wedge and Carrington Moss will have fewer homes built on them than similarly sized areas here in the Civic Quarter. If we had taken a greener approach, we would be looking at a different type of plan today. A plan for higher densities with lower traffic, for an abundance of housing, but on smaller footprints. We would have seen a much bigger move away from car dependence and towards the sort of 20-minute neighbourhoods that we see in the Netherlands and other world cities. Areas with lots of green space, affordable housing, high densities, and where it's safe and pleasant to walk, cycle, and for children to play outdoors. Of particular concern, of course, are the wetlands at Carrington Moss. Wetlands, we know, are unique because what happens when a plant dies in the wetlands, unlike a wood or anywhere else, is that the carbon it has absorbed is, of course, buried underwater for millions of years. And we know that technology firms are trying so hard to develop this sort of technology, and we could be having it happening here in Trafford for free. This is really challenging, and I know and I acknowledge the difficulty the administration faces with this. Carrington Moss is not a living bog at the moment, but we know experts agree it has the potential to be restored. It's also in private hands. I know it's not easy. We can't force them to change, but we have to remember how impossibly difficult the alternatives are. Council really needs to be doing everything it can to protect this vital resource. We need to be working with landowners and lobbying government to do everything we can to restore vital wetlands and protect them from developers, not enabling any further destruction. These plans are also calling, very worryingly, for a doubling of airport use over the next 20 years. Now, the airports say they want to do this without having any negative impacts on the climate, but we all know that that is frankly science fiction and that the technology to do that does not exist. 70% of flights are taken only by 15% of the population. So increasing airport use is about really a small number of people creating a large amount of pollution at the expense of the most vulnerable people on our planet. We must keep remembering that climate justice is social justice. And I know that our friends in the Labour Party have a deep commitment to social justice, but I do sometimes feel that Labour has a blind spot around climate justice. We're not really talking about places for everyone when our actions risk destroying the homes of others through fires, floods and droughts. Now, there are realistic and serious alternatives available. I've described the difference in densities, the different approaches to transport that we could be taking. But they require thinking outside the box. And Henry Ford supposedly said, if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. People just couldn't imagine the scale of the changes that were coming to them at that point in time. Well, we are now on the cusp of an altogether different change. A change of the kind we have never seen before. An irreversible change. We should have a plan here to solve the housing crisis while tackling the climate crisis. We should have an economy that works for people and planet, not the other way around. But this plan is offering us faster horses, and the Green Group will be voting against it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coggins. Councillor Freeman. You have 2 minutes, Councillor Freeman, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I speak in favour of Places for Everyone and it going to consultation, which is essentially about the soundness of the plan. This plan is about ensuring housing and infrastructure to support that, to enable people that need housing, including Trafford residents, can have access to it. Now, I look around this room and I know the vast majority of us in here already have access to a safe and secure home, and indeed some of us have access to more than one home. I also look around this room and I see members opposite who object to 6,000 units being built on green space, but were previously in favour of 11,000 units being built on green space. It seems to me that they left their principles behind when they went into opposition. I simply say to the detractors of this plan, what is it that prevents you from wanting for others what you have already got? What is it that you find so objectionable to this plan? And you know, I've really tried to fathom that out, and I've failed. So I simply say to those who have objections to this plan and seek to object to its soundness, just please shut up, because ultimately you are failing the very communities you purport to serve. And by the way, Councillor Evans, Stockport's example is to write asking other councils to meet their housing needs, but not offering to take any of our needs from us. And Councillor Newgrosh, our housing need is set nationally and is not something in our gift. And Councillor Goggins, I heard what you said, but I'm afraid we cannot achieve utopia. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Councillor Miss Blackburn, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Due to time restrictions, I'm limiting to what I have to say just to 2 areas, so I will be very brief. With regard to the proposals for Timperley Wedge area, I'm extremely concerned as to how, in actuality, vehicles accessing warehousing businesses will be able to travel along the fairly narrow roads of Park Road, Stockport Road and Thorley Lane through Timperley Village. And wait a minute, village, that's the word. Is there a clue there? Will properties have to be compulsorily purchased and demolished in order to provide suitable thoroughfares for laden goods vehicles? I don't think it's the right place for warehousing facilities. Secondly, will that, and I mentioned this at exec on Monday, will there be a reappraisal of the amount of office floor space identified in the Timperley Wedge proposal? Following the experiences of COVID, many employees will choose to work from home in the future, and many employers will want to reduce the office space used by their organisations. And it's vital that these numbers are evaluated. That's all I have to say. Thank you. People do need homes, but offices and warehousing needs to be put in an appropriate space and not on green land. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miss Blackburn. Councillor Brophy, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So firstly, this is just not a sound plan. But I would say one thing in support of the Labour Group here, the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework Places for Everyone plan, that the Tory group have said is more or less the same. I've stood on a platform with predecessors here. The Tories have passionately been in favour of this plan before. There's a bit of a turnaround on behalf of the Conservative group here. So the group, it fails, this plan. There's been inadequate community engagement that has been outlined by other colleagues. There are 2 peat mosses in Trafford. The one at Carrington is viable, as has been stated. And it's a crime against the environment to be developing on a peat moss, especially, and on the Greenbelt entirely. So regarding the Timpley Wedge, it's, as Councillor Newgrosh has outlined, it's one of the few green spaces in the Timpley area, and it's also providing a vital resource for people. It also helps with flood protection and with the climate change emergency. That I do agree with Councillor Goggins on this, that we're not looking at utopia when we're tackling climate change. We're tackling the worst crisis that humanity has ever faced, and looking at building on Greenbelt, it is, people are going to look back and think, why on earth did we do that? It's a crazy, crazy plan. So it's also not tackling the housing crisis. It's not doing that. Of course we want to have housing for people. Of course we want to tackle the homelessness problem. But the type of houses that will be built on Timpley Wedge will not be affordable by the younger generation. They won't be affordable by people who already live in the area. It doesn't solve the housing crisis at all. Also, the problems with building on the Greenbelt is the infrastructure just isn't there. There are no schools in the South Altrincham areas, has already been outlined. There's no health facilities there enough to support people. There's a lack of public transport infrastructure. There aren't any public transport, any trains or buses that will be able to use people. It's just encouraging people back into their cars, which we don't want. So getting back to the environment, this is clearly not a sustainable plan. The amount of carbon emissions from building on the Greenbelt, particularly peat moss, are just astronomical. Megatons will be released. There are brownfield sites in Trafford, as have been outlined due to COVID.
Councillor Brophy, you need to...
In summary, it's not a sound plan, and I would urge Trafford councillors to vote against. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brophy. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a laudable aim in this plan of building more homes, but let's be clear, Mr. Mayor, this plan is not fit for purpose. Firstly, there's the thousands of new office units being proposed despite the most rapid change to working from home in generations. Nothing in this plan takes account of the post-COVID world, which will transform the way and, more importantly, where we work. Indeed, Labour's deputy leader has only today announced that they want the right to work to be an automatic default right. There's nothing in this plan to facilitate the brownfield first approach that Councillor Wright has claimed. Indeed, council officers today have confirmed, and I quote, "It is not a sound approach to restrict greenfield development until brownfield land is developed." So is Councillor Wright really asking us to just trust developers, not to choose greenfield first? Nothing in this plan guarantees new school places for the thousands of children who will be moving into my ward before the houses are built. Nothing guaranteed for transport links, not even confirmed funding for the support of Carrington Relief Road or the Timpley Spine. Mr. Mayor, it's clear that these plans need rejecting in favour of an actual brownfield first approach. I hope this chamber joins us tonight in rejecting these.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Minnis.
Working. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, my understanding, this is GMSF, but slightly rebranded. So, there's two aspects, and I'm going to look at this in terms of planning. So, to me, in terms of planning for the Timpley Wedge, there isn't the road infrastructure for it. We haven't got, as Councillor Brophy said, we're not going to have the public transport, so it's going to push people into cars. Roads like Park Road and other similar ones are too congested to take the additional traffic. The housing there is not going to be affordable, so in terms of waiting, you just don't have it there. You're going to put about £500,000 and over homes, not affordable. The area is also a conservation area, as there are many rare species of birds and that nest there, along with the greater crested newts and other species. This is their home, and any relocation plan for them, they don't get emails, they don't read emails, would be disturbing their habitat and would actually contribute to the decline in their extinction. The flooding risks then turn into flooding certainty under the climate emergency that we're in, because Timperley has flooded lots of times in the past couple of years. With Carrington Moss, digging up the huge amounts of carbon in the peatland area is irresponsible, and how on earth this is even an idea, I find very strange. We make decisions here, all of us make decisions here for the future generations. It's not just for the next 10 years, next 20 years, it's for way, way into the future. And we have to consider the impact of our decisions, and we need to take them seriously. We can't be just going, well, you know, we need to build some houses, there's a nice piece of that bit of land, we can just build it on there, and not think about the consequences. We need to think. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Minnis. Councillor Patel.
Thank you. Like its predecessor, Places for Everyone has become a political football to the extent we're in the perverse place of receiving news of reduced housing building figures as a positive outcome. The only voice not heard in this debate is the voice of those in housing need. Brownfield First is the policy now, and it has been for many years, yet we are still unable to meet our housing targets. The irony here is that all opposition parties would be prepared to see every scrap of land in Old Trafford, for example, developed with no thought spared for the impacts on that community. In response to the quip from Councillor Newgrosh about the Labour administration being in with developers, the Lib Dems had a very recent chance to live their housing values, and they've just flogged their site to the highest bidder for luxury development. Places for Everyone is about so much more than the Greenbelt, that we are seriously considering a once-in-a-generation strategic plan that looks at our infrastructure, jobs, transport network, environmental assets at a scale that is geographically meaningful should be embraced. I am ashamed that it has been kicked down the road for so many years. Please, let's just get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. Councillor Holden.
I hope that you'll forgive me if my voice falters a little tonight. I'm actually going through a deep personal crisis. I'm agreeing with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. And for an old Conservative, you've no idea how painful that feels. The other is the shock, the true and heartfelt shock to discover that for the last 17 years, I haven't been representing Sale West. It's entirely been done by Councillor Wright. I'm sure that in summing up you'll be able to point out that there are 3 of us from this side of the House who have been proudly and joyfully representing the residents of Sale West for our entire political career. I must admire the ingenuity of this plan to actually reduce the amount of Carrington Moss which will be taken up on paper, whilst protecting an abandoned golf course in Flixton is truly politically wonderful. However, if you look at the rather beautifully prepared diagrams, you'll notice that Western Way and Burnham Boulevard, the 2 major roads ripping across the Moss, have been carefully positioned so that the areas on either side of them are small, limited by roads, and hence vulnerable to a very powerful developer who wants to build everywhere on that area. There is no doubt that we could do some more housing. I'm a little worried that we went through the pain of arguing about a climate crisis only to find it doesn't exist because we can rip up a peat bog. We can build those houses, but if you build the roads, the developers will turn up and build again because they don't want to build on brownfield. No developer does. Greenfield first. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. I'm going to ask Councillor Wright to reply.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure where to start with some of these responses this evening, but just to start with Councillor Evans. I'm not sure he's been hugging Councillor Evans because you created the original plan. And that concrete is someone's home, by the way. I'm not going to go near your past obsession with school places because that's been addressed by Councillor Carter, one of my colleagues, on many occasions. And your comments regarding the local plan, you were part of the cross-party consultative group on the local plan, so you should know that that's already underway. And to mention Robert Jenrick, well, let's face it, he's got form for justifying planning applications above the planning inspector, has he not? Councillor Newgrosh and Councillor Morgan, just to discuss, I mean, you both almost mentioned land banking. As you're both aware, land banking is a government policy and there's nothing we can do about it. Particularly Councillor Morgan, if you've got an issue with land banking and the influence of developers, maybe you should lobby your own government to change that. Councillor Newgrosh mentioned the pandemic has changed everything. The pandemic hasn't shrunken the homelessness crisis, Councillor Newgrosh. In fact, it's worsened it, you may have noticed. Why the rush, you said, Councillor Newgrosh? Because we have a housing crisis. That's why there's a rush. Councillor Coggins, higher densities. So it seems that the Green Party are happy to shove everyone over there and seeing high density development as long as we get to keep our green spaces, not in my backyard. Councillor Brophy. No affordable housing. 45% as a minimum in Timperley Wedge, 15% as a minimum in Carrington. And affordable housing, as you well know, is not the only solution to this housing crisis. We are the only party in this room who are taking the housing crisis seriously. We have a housing target which we must meet. If we do not follow this plan, more Greenbelt will be released for development, it will be unfettered development across the borough, and we'll be in serious trouble. And far more of our valued green spaces will be lost. I ask the Council to approve the plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. So we're going to go to the vote, and Councillor Wright asked for a recorded vote. And all those in favour of the plan, please raise your hand and we will count you and write your names down. Okay, hands down. Those against? Okay, hands down. Any abstentions? No abstentions. Okay, I think that's been... Can we give the numbers, please, Ian? Thank you. I think that's been carried. Thank you, everybody. Item number 7 is a report of